You are listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominyse.
And Keeley.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are doing part 1 of Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I think that's all of it. But before we talk about the book, let's see how Keeley's week has been.
My week has been okay. Not really anything special. My dog ran off, but she was an easy catch. Yeah, really nothing. What about you?
Good. It's our last week on actual campus. I'm like counting down. I have one more day with students. Praise be. I love to my students that are listening, because I know some of them do. I love you guys. I'm just as happy as you are. Let's see. By the time this airs, I will already be married. But I have 11 days at the time of this record. So I'm like, I'm getting there. But we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about us, because this is a long episode. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a 2-parter. So, Keeley, do you have the blurb?
I do. Bryce Quinlan had the perfect life, working hard all day and partying all night until a demon murdered her closest friends, leaving her bereft, wounded, and alone. When the accused is behind bars but the crimes start up again, Bryce finds herself at the heart of the investigation. She'll do whatever it takes to avenge their deaths. Hunt Athalar is a notorious fallen angel, now enslaved to the archangels he once attempted to overthrow. His brutal skill and incredible strength have been set to one purpose: to assassinate his boss's enemies, no questions asked. But with a demon wreaking havoc on the city, he's offered an irresistible deal. Help Bryce find the murderer, and his freedom will be within reach. As Bryce and Hunt dig deep into Crescent City's underbelly, they discover a dark power that threatens everything and everyone they hold dear. And they find in each other a blazing passion, one that could set them both free, if only they'd let it. With unforgettable characters, sizzling romance, and page-turning suspense, this richly inventive new fantasy series delves into the heartache of loss, the price of freedom, and the power of love.
I'm so excited to talk about this with Keeley, because I guess we won't be able to talk about it until part 2, but we'll talk about it a little bit. So, did you read the blurb?
Nope.
Okay, so she didn't read... I'll save that for the spoilers, but she didn't read the blurb, so she pulled a me, which is funny. I was like, let me know when you're traumatized. I got several messages while she was reading this. So I'm super excited. But if you could describe this book in one word, what would you say? Or at least maybe part 1. I don't know. However you want to do it. It's hard. It's a lot to put in one word.
Yeah. Colossal.
That's magnanimous, or however you say that word. It's huge. I don't really have a word, but I would just like to say HBIC, or that Bryce is a bad bee, because I love Bryce Quinlan. She's my favorite. I think she's my favorite of all of the Sarah J. Maas.
Very strong females.
Yeah, so I love Bryce. She's a boss. We're gonna say boss. That's my word. So, all right. I dread my general summaries on these, because it's so hard. Okay, so this book, completely separate yourself from ACOTAR. Now, there will be ACOTAR spoilers probably in these episodes. So I hope, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could, I don't know what I'm going to say, so I can't, I'm just going to say spoilers, and maybe there won't be, but, yeah. So if you haven't read ACOTAR, maybe not listen yet, but if you don't care, then whatever. But in general, before we get to spoilers, this is the most recent series of Sarah J. Maas. You definitely can tell it from her writing style. And you can kind of tell it, like, so she wrote Throne of Glass first, Akatar, except for Silver Flames, and then started Crescent City, wrote Silver Flames, went back to Crescent City. You definitely can tell in Silver Flames, like, it's different. I really think, and a lot of people think this, that, like, from here going out, because she just always has so many characters, that she's probably going to write in third person. Or, like, not even, like, I guess we get so many point of views, but, like, just, like, it just jumps around. Like, it's not, like, just one person point of view.
It's third person omniscient, I think.
Oh, see.
Omniscient.
I didn't know how far that went, but I guess there's a name for that. So this book is a whole new world. So separate yourself from Akatar, at least for a minute. And we are introduced to Bryce Quinlan. This world is different because there are not just fae and, like, scary monsters, but there's, like, humans. There are fae. There are shifters, mostly, like, into wolves. I guess other animal. Yeah, deer shifters. There are water people, mer people, mares. There are vampires. There are demonaki. There are spirits. There are fire sprites. There are asteri. There are gods. There are lots of things. When I have it written down pretty much when I get to the actual spoilers. So many characters, so many types of characters. They live in Lunathian, which I highly recommend that if you want to read this book, you gotta look at the map. And I'm not a map person. I kind of try and take notes in this episode, but it's a lot of information. The biggest crutch to Crescent City is that the world building is so vast compared to any of her other books. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't get into it or don't like the series, but if you can get past the world building, you will enjoy this book. So this is a, like, melting pot. This is the United States of fantasy. And Bryce is a half human, half fae. Like, she's 23, I believe, when this book starts. She has several friends. She lives with her best friend, Danica. Honestly, they're like platonic soulmates, to be honest. And Danica is a wolf shifter. She is a very, very powerful one, and she is second in line to take over the wolves behind her mom. Her grandfather is still alive. So she lives with Danica, and the pack of wolves are always with them. And from the blurb, you will know that she loses her best friend very at some point in this book, and that really ruins Bryce's life. Bryce had it hard. This is a very judgmental world, so because she is not full fae, the fae don't really like her. I mean, the humans are fine with her, but, you know, humans are the bottom of the food chain here. She has a human mom. Her dad is to be determined later in the book. And so when she really just loses everything about herself, and she works for Jessica, who is a sorceress. She's amazing. And she deals with, like, stolen nefarious artifacts every day. But 2 years after the death of her best friend, it really was thought to be solved, but it's not. And so the governor of the city puts her on the task, and she buddy cops with Hunt Athalar, who they call the Umbra Mortis, the shadow of death. He is a fallen angel. So there are angels in this book, and he is a slave to the city and the governor. And so they have a wonderful banter relationship. And different than some of the other books, this book isn't as spicy as the others. But there is that cute playfulness. But they are basically tasked together to figure out the truth behind the murders. Or at least so they think. And there is lots of heartbreak in this book. Issues with trust. Bryce has a half brother who she is estranged from. She's estranged from her father by choice. She is just a very independent person, but she puts on a very good front for herself. And so I highly recommend this book to anybody, especially any female who is struggling with identity or finding themselves. It's just it is such a good book and story to really relate to, as far as the heartbreak goes, and friendship and family and finding oneself. I think it's really good. So that's all I'm gonna say. That was kind of a lot still. I mean, that's as much as you're gonna get out of me. So if you have not read Crescent City, maybe if you have not read any of the Akatar books, pause and come back later. If you don't care to be spoiled, we're just going to jump right in.
Before that,
I
want to do triggers.
I was going to say, are there triggers?
Yes.
Yes.
So those are misogyny, slavery, depression, suicidal ideation, and murder. I also want to throw in, because it's not put on there, but it does, we see it quite a bit throughout, but a bit of racism too.
Yeah. Classism, racism.
Yes. So those are your trigger and content warnings.
Yes. And I'm going to try to get through, this book is broken down into 4 parts. I'm going to try to get through parts 1 and 2. We know how Sarah writes. She is long-winded at the beginning and fast-paced at the end. So we'll just see where we get. So go ahead and get started. There is a lot of world building at the beginning. So this book is book 1 of 3. She is, I think, recently contracted now to do a 4th book in this series, possibly. But it initially started as a 3-book contract. So this is book 1 of 3. And we get a lot of backstory here. So there are 4 houses of Midgard. So Midgard is the world. Pangera is like a continent. We are in Crescent City, which they just call it Crescent City. We'll learn later why, but the city is actually known as Lunathian. And then within Lunathian, there are like suburbs, districts, etc., etc. So in this world of Midgard, there are 4 houses. These houses were decreed in 33 VE, which we will learn means Vanir or post-Vanir, Vanir era, I believe. So Vanir is what they call all of the like magical people. So the angels, the fae, the shifters, those are Vanirs. So there's House of Earth and Blood. That includes shifters, humans, witches, ordinary animals, and some chosen by Luna, which is like a goddess. There's the House of Sky and Breath. That is the fae, Malachine. I have no idea what a Malachine is. Angels, elementals, sprites, those not blessed by Solus, and those favored by Luna. Just as a fact, sprites were kicked out of the House of Sky and Breath because of their participation in what is known as the Fall, and they are now considered to be lowers. There is the House of Many Waters, that is river sprites, mare, water beasts, kelpies, Nock, and others watched over by Eugenics. And then there is the House of Flame and Shadow. Those are Dominyse, vampires, reapers, dragons, wraiths, necromancers, the wicked and unnamed things that Erd cannot see. So part 1 is called The Hollow, and we are introduced to Bryce Quinlan. Bryce is like curvaceous. She's got this like bright red hair. She's beautiful, whatever. And she only wears like 6-inch heels, tight fitting clothes. Like she's definitely weaponizing her body for sure. So Bryce is at the gallery known as Griffin's Antiquities, and that is owned by her boss, Jessica Roga. And so she's at the gallery. She's like, yep, it's a normal Thursday or whatever. She's like, there's a wolf at the door. And we'll learn that the wolf is Danica. Danica is her best friend. She's a wolf shifter, and she is the leader of the Pack of Devils, which is like the head pack of the wolves in Lunathian. Bryce works at this gallery. There are no windows, but there's like extensive security. It's like Fort Knox in that place. Jessica has it locked down tight. There's cameras everywhere. And she has some like co-workers kinda, but they're actually slaves to Jessica. So we meet Lahaba, who is a tiny little fire sprite. And Lahaba asks like, is that Danica? And she like does not like Danica. And Lahaba is on the other side of the door to the archives. We'll learn that in Griffin's Antiquities, there is a like hidden away library that is not like just open to the public. And Lahaba's job is to, even though she's fire sprite, is to watch over like the books and stuff and make sure they don't get away, which will come back later. And Bryce just says like, go downstairs, Lahaba. She calls Lahaba Lily. Lahaba calls her BB. It's really cute. And it is, again, it's Thursday. It's summertime. Danica smells and looks like garbage. Apparently, she had to break up a fight between a satyr and a night stalker, and she got like goo all over her. So we will learn that the wolves are like part of the police force, basically, in this city. And Danica says that she just needs to drop her sword here for a few hours. She has this sword that is a family heirloom. And instead of it going to her mom, Sabine, Her mom's name is Sabine, who is like next in line to take over for her grandfather. They call like the head of the wolves is called the Prime, and Sabine is supposed to be the prime apparent, like, or the next one. But Danica's super powerful, like, and she's just like a better person than her mom. And so like there's rumors swirling that Danica might surpass her mom. So the sword, her grandfather did not give the sword to her mom. He gave it to Danica. So she like is wanting to just drop it there for a few hours. And Bryce tells us about Jessica. So Jessica is a 400-year-old witch who deflected from the House of Earth and Blood, which is where the witches are, and she decided to join the House of Flame and Shadow, and she only answers to the Underking, who is like the Crypt Keeper, and he is the head of the House of Flame and Shadow. Jessica is always like spelling people. She's always like, I'm gonna turn you into a toad or like whatever. And she has this like, she'll like occasionally have people have things in this tank downstairs. And Bryce is like, I think that they might have been like people that pissed her off, and she put them in there. Danica opens the closet and tells Bryce that her dance stuff is like stinking it up because Bryce likes to do ballet, but she was told that she doesn't have the body for it. So again, this is like some of that like racism, like because of her curvaceous, like more human body. And Bryce had like forgotten to take the stuff home because they smoke what is called mirth root in this world. So like basically weed. And Danica had taken Bryce to get a tattoo recently, and she's telling Danica, like, this tattoo is so sore, and she has, like, basically writing, like, down her back, and it says, through love, all is possible, in some, like, weird language that Danica found. Danica got a matching tattoo somewhere else on her body, but because Danica is a full Vanir, so she's a shifter, hers, like, is already healed, but Bryce is half human, so she doesn't heal as fast. Danica goes to, like, take a shower, and Bryce knows that she must have to go to a meeting with the city heads, and it must be serious. Danica tells Bryce that Philip Briggs is going to be released on a technicality. We learn that he is a human who is the leader of the Human Rebellion, so they're fighting back against the Vanir, and he basically got busted with a bomb lab, and Danica in her pack had locked him up, but now something was like off in the paperwork, so he's being released, and she's going to have a meeting with them. So again, the Pack of Devils, which Danica is the head of, is like kind of the city police, but there's also what is known as like the Ox, and like the Ox is the Fae, like, police, and then there are the 33rd. Those are the Angels that are, like, the police. So there's, like, several different, like, police-type units around here. Micah is the governor of Crescent City, and he is an archangel, and archangels are, like, specifically bred, and they are, like, the leaders of their cities, and then everyone responds to them, and then the archangels respond to the Asteri, who are, like, the masters of this world. So in Lunathian, we have the Prime, which is the leader of the wolves. There's the Autumn King, who is the head of the Fae. The Under King and the Bone Quarter. There's a meat market, which is head up by the Viper Queen. There's an Oracle, and there is the River Queen. And those are like the 6 lower heads, and they all answer to Micah, who again answers to the Asteri. The humans have no head and no representation, which is kind of how Philip Briggs like rose to the top. You know, he might have had good intentions, but he kind of just like, you know, got lost along the way. He doesn't really care about killing innocent people. Micah is the head of what's known as the Central District as well. And there's so many names. Like Valbara is like the country. I don't know. It gets confusing. That's why you need to look at a map because it's so confusing. But we're in Crescent City, so that's what we're at. So along with Lahaba, Jessica also has another slave, which is Syrinx. And Syrinx is a chimera. He's like a lion that's like a dog. Like that's like what I picture in my head.
Yeah.
And he is supposed to like guard the books along with Lahaba, and Jessica keeps saying like he is not a pet, even though Bryce treats him like one. And Jessica calls because she has cameras everywhere, and she's like, tell Danica if she continues to use the supply closet as a locker, I'm going to turn her into a lizard. So Danica has like, she's the leader, and then she has a second in line, that's Natalie, and then her third in line is Connor Holstrom. And they like have been calling Bryce that day asking if like Danica's like losing her crap over like Briggs getting out. Danica switches back into her wolf form, and fun fact, they keep their clothes. Like, you know how the Hulk like shifts. We're like, whenever someone shifts, like, do you keep your clothes or not? Danica does keep her clothes because she like puts on Bryce's clothes and then shifts into the wolf form. And Bryce tells Danica that Jespa is like sending her out on a mission to find a stolen artifact. It's a Fae relic known as the Horn, or Luna's Horn, and it was stolen recently during a power outage. And because Bryce is like half fae, she only has like some of their senses. So she has like the ears, she has enhanced smells and hearing. And they're just like kind of walking through like the city. And Bryce is trying to tell Danica like to chill out. It's going to be fine. They're not going to let Briggs out. Like he's too dangerous. And she says Micah might send the Umbra Mortis after him, which is a lightning wielding angel. And he's again the shadow of death. And Bryce is worried that Danica might get killed, like because they haven't made the drop yet. And we'll learn later what the drop is. Danica tells Bryce that her brother, Bryce's brother, will be at this meeting. And she says, "You mean my half brother?" And we learn that Rune Dannon, Crown Prince of the Valbaren Fae. Anyways, every time I hear Rune Dannon, like that's all I can think about. Rune is Bryce's half brother. He is the Crown Prince of the Valbaren Fae. And no one knows that he is her brother except for Danica and then like their parents, basically. And Bryce does not talk to him. And she tells Danica, will tell him he can go to hell, basically. Bryce doesn't know where the horn is currently. And Danica says, just tell Jessica like you looked for it and you couldn't find it. Because she doesn't really want her looking for it because she said this is dangerous. So Bryce has like her daily armor on. Everyone else has weapons and stuff. And all Bryce has, she's got her claws, she's got her nails. And like her makeup, her outfits, like that is how she defends herself. And she gets a call from her mom. Her mom's name is Ember Quinlan. And her mom is very overprotective. She loves actually that she's like best friends and lives with Danica because Danica's super powerful again and can protect her. And Bryce's stepfather's name is Randall. And she treats him like that is her real dad. That's the only dad she knows. And he taught her how to protect herself since she is basically a weakling compared to the Fae. And he taught her how to like use guns because he was a sharpshooter like in the army or the military or whatever. I believe the humans are like required to go to the military. Like they don't have a choice. Bryce's mom wants to come and visit next weekend, but Danica lies and says, oh, we're going to a game. But it's really because Bryce does not want her mom coming if Philip Briggs is going to get let out of jail. So they go to what's known as the Old Square, and there's a gate there. It's called the Heart Gate. And there are 6 other gates within the city because 7 is like their holy number. So there's 6 other gates, and these gates have been there since the beginning of time. And they're actually able to like communicate with each other, like through the gates, like you could talk to the other side of the city. But it's kind of a tourist trap. So there's also this stone there. And if they touch it, it like takes a drop of your power, which like obviously humans don't have any. And Bryce has very little because she's half human. But it takes like a little bit of your power and people like make wishes, kind of like a wishing well. On like the Heart Gate and on this pad, there's 7 stones that represent the city. There's an emerald and a rose, which represents the 5 roses district. There's an opal and wings for the CBD, which is like the comitium and where the angels are. There's a heart for the Old Square, a sapphire and oak tree for Moonwood, which is where the wolves are. Amethyst and a human hand for Asphodel Meadows, which is like Hades related, like, you know, we love a little Greek stuff in there. And there's a tiger's eye and serpent for the meat market, and then onyx and skull and bones for the bone quarter. So Danica uses her badge to like cut the tourist line. And on the gates, it says the power should always belong to those who give their lives to the city, which is interesting that it's still there because Bryce thinks the Asteri would have like taken something like that down because they're the power basically in the city, but they don't. And Danica is like, she wants to make a wish. She says she's wishing for Ethan, who is another wolf, to win his game because he plays Sunball, which in my mind, have you ever seen Road to El Dorado? Like the cartoon.
Yes.
You know how they like throw the ball up on the wall? Like I think that's what Sunball is. Like I've seen like other people say that. I think that's what Sunball is. So he plays Sunball, and he's one of the wolf shifters. And Bryce is like thinking about the drop again. So what the drop is all of the Fae are Vanir and some half Fae, so Bryce, can have immortal lives. It's not true immortality, but like they could live to be hundreds or 1,000 years old. And you basically have to choose to do the drop. And so for like most people, they go to like a government center. You have to have what's called an anchor, which is another person to like anchor you because you basically like die and you drop down into your power. And then you have 6 minutes to like reascend back up to your body because your human body dies. And if you don't have an anchor, there's no way to like, there's nothing fueling you to get back up to like life. And so Bryce is like, they do like tests on them and everything. And Bryce is like not supposed to have any power. Like even when she becomes immortal, she'll just like be immortal, but she'll still be really weak. Obviously Danica's supposed to have tons of power. Shifters can live to be like 500 years old. The Fae can live to be like 1,000 years old. Humans don't do the drop. So obviously they just live normal lives. And like she doesn't really know how long she'll live since she's kind of like half fae or whatever. So it could be anything. And they also, when they do the drop, the government takes what's called, they generate this first light basically. And the government takes like most of it, and that fuels like the city, and like, it's like their electrical system basically. And it also can be used for healing. So again, her and Danica are both like 23, and they had both decided that 27 is the perfect age because like they won't be saggy yet. Like their boobs will still be perky, but like they'll be like fully adults basically. Which one thing people really like about this book too is that like these females are like adults. They're not like, I'm 19 or I'm 17. Like they're full-fledged adults at that age. And so Bryce makes a wish, and she's like, I wish Danica would get a manicure basically. So that night, she goes home, and when she gets there, the pack of devils and Danica are already there. Ethan won his sunball game, and he's, like, out partying, so he's not there. But she goes and finds, like, all the wolves, like, dying of hunger because Danica is their alpha, and she's eating, like, half a pizza in the kitchen and will not let them eat until she's done eating. And Bryce knows that she's stressed, so she's like, this meeting must not have went well. And Danica tells her that they did release Philip Briggs. And then after the meeting, her mom, like, ripped into her and embarrassed her because during the blackout, when Danica was on watch, there were two like college students that were killed during the blackout. So she finally lets the pack eat, and Bryce realizes that she's running late for a date. So she's dating a human named Reed, and he is like the heir to like Retner Industries. It's like a magitech industry, and basically like they're like one of the few human families that are like get like notability along with the Fae and stuff because they're basically rich and they do stuff for them. And the pack, no one in the pack liked him. And Bryce is like, he's hot, but like even the sex is terrible. But she's basically like, you know, she does not want to date a veneer. And she tells Danica like, well, at least he's not a veneer. And she calls them alpha hoes. Like that's how she calls all of like the men who are Fae and like veneer. And she says he's not an alpha hoe who will lock me up for a 3-day sex marathon. And we find out that Danica had actually set her up with Reed, even though she doesn't like him, because Danica like does a part-time security job at his family's company. So as she's going to leave, Connor like blocks the doorway, and he basically says like, are you gonna like quit playing with me finally? Like dump him, like let's go out. And she tells him, I don't date wolves because they're obviously probably very territorial. And she's like, I don't want another male veneer running my life. He says, I'm not your father. And he like stands over her. And Bryce has this really cool thing that she does where she like looks down her nose at people that are towering over her. And so she kind of does that to him. And she's basically like been like avoiding this for like 5 years since she went to college because he's had a thing for her. And what we'll find out is like Danica made him wait and like not approach Bryce until Bryce was ready. But she must have gave him like the okay because he's like, look, it's been 5 years. Like, I'm ready to date you, basically. And Bryce, like thinks back at, like, the whole alpha hole thing. And the reason she doesn't like veneer is because her mom basically, like, obviously was with a Fae male. And he locked her up and tried to, like, keep her hostage. And she ended up getting pregnant with Bryce. He had no idea. And she, like, also he, like, hit her. But she was able to escape with Bryce and, like, get away. So, like, that's, like, Bryce's whole thing. Like, I don't want that to happen. And as she leaves for her date, Danica tells her to light it up, bitch. And, like, that's, like, their, like, saying is always, like, light it up, light it up. And they do also tell each other, like, they love each other. But Danica was, like, it took her a while to come around to saying, like, that she, like, they loved each other. But they will learn that they got into a wreck, like, this with this motorcycle and, like, a whole big thing. And, like, ever since then, Danica started saying, like, that she loved Bryce. So Bryce thinks how, like, she's the weakest of her friend group. There is Danica, who is the alpha of the wolves. Then she's friends with Juniper. Juniper is a deer shifter, and she's, like, about to be, like, prima ballerina, basically. And then there's Fury, who no one knows what Fury is, but she is, like, an assassin, basically. And then there's just Bryce, and she's like, I'm just a half-a nothing, basically. And she doesn't really want to go on the date with Reed, but she goes anyways. And as she's leaving, like, she's talking about her apartment. It's basically, like, super ghetto and run down. But she, like, Danica lives with Bryce there because that's all Bryce can afford. But if she let Danica pay for it, like, they could live in a really nice place. So she gets to the restaurant, even though she's running late, he's not there, and she ends up waiting an hour for him. And she's pissed because she starts drinking wine, and she's like, I cannot afford this wine, like, if he does not show up. And everyone around her is, like, veneer, and they're looking at her and, like, judging her for being a half-breed. And Connor texts her saying, like, I wanted to say, I think it's worth it for you and me. I'm crazy about you. Just give me a chance. And Reed finally comes in and he's just like a narcissistic asshole. And she thinks, like basically, like she's looking out the veneer and she's like, one of the reasons she dances is like to try to stay fit if she had to ever outrun one of them because they'll kill her basically. And Reed comes in and he like mentions the war with the humans and how it's been going on for centuries. And she asks, does he think that the war's going to come here? And he's like, no, the Asteri wouldn't let that happen. But she also thinks of the people who support like the human side against the Asteri and how they're all marked as like slaves now. If they get like caught by the Asteri, they get turned into slaves. And they have this tattoo on their wrist that says SPQM, which it means something, but I don't know. So it means something, but it represents like the slavery thing. So we learned that Bryce is actually part of the House of Sky and Breath because she does know who her father is. And in order for him to like extend protections to her and also for her like to go to college, she had to pledge fealty to the House of Sky and Breath. And she notices in the restaurant there's like another Fae woman and she has basically like a human like with her. And Danica sends her a text and says, you need to dump Reed and take Connor out of his misery. He's been waiting years. Reed starts like ignoring her. So basically the like first time they had sex, he literally like they had sex and he like rolled over and got on his phone. And that's his whole MO. Like he's always on his phone. He's always ignoring her. And she's like, you know what? I'm sick of this. She's like, I'm leaving. And he's like, oh, okay, you're going to the bathroom. And she's like, no, I'm leaving. And she grabs the bottle of wine and she goes to the table where like the Fae like kept like looking at her. And she's like, oh, do you like what you see? Because people always assume Bryce is also a prostitute because of how she dresses. And the Fae's like, yeah, I'd pay you a gold mark to like watch you have sex with the human that she has. And she says, I didn't know that you Fae were so cheap nowadays. And she like leaves or whatever and steals the bottle of wine. She doesn't want to go back to the apartment because she knows that the wolves are there. So she calls Fury and Juniper so that they can all go out. And she stops and buys like some mirth root. And the person was like, oh, do you want to like try this scent or whatever? But she's like, no, like that's new. I don't want to do that. So she heads to the club and Connor texts her because she's like, fine, like we'll go out on one date. And she texts him and says, like, we can do pizza on Saturday. He tells her she looked really delicious when she left the apartment, and he's glad that she dumped Reed. He thought he might have to kill him, but promises not to go all alpha hole on her, and he's been thinking of all the ways he can spoil her and just to message him when she gets home safe.
Like, excuse me?
I know. Like, go home now, Bryce! But Fury sneaks up on her and is like, gotcha, basically. And she's like, Danica's gonna kill you if she knew you were out here like so oblivious, because Danica and them are always like, you need to be paying more attention, like Bryce, like things could happen to you. And she asks Bryce like, where's the leggy one, talking about Juniper. And Fury, like, she mentions the scent of Fury and Fury's like, stay away from that stuff, like it's not good. Danica texts them and is like, don't have fun without me. So it's pack night, and so Danica cannot like leave her pack. Like she can't, like they have a dedicated night at home that they do this, so she can't come out with them. Otherwise, the four of them are known as like party girls. Like Danica is like, they call her the party princess, basically. So she goes to the club and they go to the White Raven, and like she gets super high and she ends up like having sex with some strange person in the club, even though she just told Connor, but she's like, I'm just gonna get this out of my system, like whatever. So she heads home that night and she's like barefoot, like walking up the stairs, and all she's thinking about is like, she's pretty sure like having sex with Connor is gonna be great, and like that's why she's been afraid to like be with him all this time, because she knows like this is probably gonna be amazing, and she's like not ready to fall head over heels. And she like go up the stairs and she's like, she could barely remember the code to get in the building. The building's raggedy. Like they're supposed to have cameras everywhere, but the cameras don't work. The lights don't really work. And she pulls out her keys and she drops them, and there's like a puddle on the ground, and she picks it up and it's red. And she's like, this is blood. And then she looks at her door and it is like a mangled mess of like iron. Like it is all tore up. And also they have what's called protections here, which are like spells to like ward their home. So like on top of the door being locked, like they have spells, and this door is ripped to shreds. So she's like, okay, this must be the drugs. Like I'm high. But she goes in and she sees what should be her friends in a pile of like meat scraps on her bed, on her floor, in her apartment. Yeah, and that's when Keeley was like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. Like, what is happening here? What did I sign up for? Yeah, that was devastating, because I was like, oh, I'm liking these people. And then...
Yeah, at this point, I was like, it's 4 or 5 chapters in, and I already, like, really care for these characters.
Yeah, and rip your heart to shreds. Rip it out. So she's like, okay. So Bryce like turns around. She like hears something like near the trash chute or whatever. She's like, oh, okay. Like the killer must be like leaving. So she's like, okay, I'm about to find out like who, like at least ID this person or whatever. So like they can find him. So she runs to the alley and she doesn't even have like shoes on. She grabs like a table leg and she can smell like a creature, like a rotting smell. She hears a scream and there's a creature that's like a demon. It has no eyes, just like nose slits. It's like Voldemort without eyes. Like gray, translucent, and it's eating an angel. And she like slaps it with the table leg and it slices her thigh, which like burns so bad. But then she like hits it again and it never lunges for her. It just keeps going back to this angel. It's like ripping out its like chest basically. But finally it runs away and she like calls the police with the angel's phone and the guy's like, where are you? Like, where are you? I can't help you. I don't know where you are. And she's like, track this phone. And she's giving the number and the guy on the other end's like, oh my God, like that's, and he never says who it is. And we switch to like another character. So we switch to Isaiah and he is an angel. And he is part of the 33rd. He's also a slave. And he's part of the police force. So he's like looking at Bryce and he's like, she looks like shit. So they're in the police station basically now. And Bryce is being held as a witness, not as a suspect. And in comes Hunt Athalar. Which I will say, like, I'm not the biggest Hunt fan. I do like them together, but like he's not Reese or like Azrael or anything. Like he's not that for me. But he's cool or whatever. So Hunt comes in and like he's a hunter, a killer, a monster. And he's like, is she still not speaking? And Hunt is the Umbra Mortis, which again means shadow of death. And so we get they got the results back of like blood tests they ran on Bryce. And like, we learned that she's a half breed again. She has they call it full civitas. She has full citizenship. And she will be able to become immortal when she does make the drop, but she hasn't made the drop yet. Hunt had actually been the one who found them and she was like a wild, like crazy animal and fighting them. And he looks at her file and says like, well, she looks like your standard spoiled like party girl. And she's Danica Fendir's roommate, the party princess herself. And he realizes, oh my God, Danica and the pack of devils, all of them are dead. So Hunt and Isaiah are part of Micah's, what they call the Triari. It's like a warrior team, cop team, whatever. And all of them except for Naomi are slaves. And they have already arrested Briggs again for the murders, but Hunt doesn't really know, or Isaiah, I can't remember who's thinking or talking here, like how he could have even done something to this level. Like he's just a human. And Sabine busts in and she's like, where's that slut? I'm gonna kill her. Like she hates Bryce. Like she always has bad stuff about Bryce. So Hunt's like pissed immediately and he like flickers with lightning, which is such an attractive power. Like anytime anybody has lightning power, I'm like, ooh, I love that. And so he's like, eyes like flicker with lightning. And we learned that the angels have been bred by the Asteri and they all have like elemental powers, like wind, but like whatever. But Hunt is like unique because he's the only one with lightning power and he is like super powerful. And he has a brand on his forehead from the witches, like when he became a slave, because his power is actually like not even at its strongest potential because he has that brand on his forehead. It's like, they call it like a halo. So we learned that Hunt and all the other slaves had been in the rebellion 200 years ago and it failed. And so now they are slaves, but the humans have like restarted the rebellion and it's been going on for 40 years. So Sabine is only there not because her daughter's dead. She's looking for Danica's sword. And she's like, Bryce stole it and Danica should have known better than dealing with her. And Hunt says he doesn't have to tell you like anything right now because she's like asking all these questions. And we learned that even though Isaiah is a slave, like him and Sabine are like neck and neck on their like rank basically in the city. And a dark-haired woman walks into Bryce's like holding room and her name is Victoria. She's another slave. She's a wraith, and wraiths are like beings that can possess bodies. So even though she's a wraith, her punishment as a slave is that she cannot body swap. So like she has been stuck in this body for a very long time and it's starting to like get old basically and deteriorate, but she can't body swap. So Vic asks Bryce questions and like Bryce is not answering and they get Sabine to leave because they're like, we need you to go do some paperwork. So Vic like starts putting videos of Bryce from tonight and like her text messages and stuff on like the screen. And she tells Bryce like the video in her building was not up to code. So they don't have like video footage. They only have the audio. And Hunt asks Isaiah, like, does Bryce have family? Isaiah says that the file doesn't list who her dad is, but her like human parents are on their way. And Isaiah says, why does Sabine think it's Bryce's fault when her file is like almost empty? And Danica had a 7-part file. And Hunt kind of like shivers when he sees like that Bryce was with Fury tonight, because he's been ordered to kill Fury twice and like hasn't been able to because some kind of order come down to like stop him. So Vic is still like putting these messages up on the screen, and Hunt tells her to stop because she's like, this is not relevant. And it's like Bryce hooking up in the bed, like I'm messing with this guy in the bathroom, like, and like Danica's like, you are stupid, like you guys are dumb, you're having fun without me, like just, you know, like normal messages that like girls are gonna have with their friends. And then she plays the audio from their building, and all you can hear is the wolves screaming and Danica saying like, please stop, please, like begging and pleading. And Hunt busts into the room pissed, and Bryce like explodes. Like she like loses it. She flips over the table. He like puts up a windshield between him like and Vic, and then Bryce like projectile vomits all over the room. And Bryce is like, I want to go home. And Isaiah says, you can't go home. Like it's a crime scene. It's not safe there. And then Naomi comes in, and she's their captain, and she's the one that's not a slave. And she calls, and she says like, we need to let her go and do not follow her. We got a call from Rune Dannon, who says like she is under the Sky and Breath jurisdiction, and like they should have been notified, so like we have to release her. So Bryce leaves, and shortly after Rune comes in, and they are like, Rune Dannon, Crown Prince of the Valbaran Fae. If you're on TikTok, you know what I'm talking about. Like that sound is everything. And one thing that Rune has, he has the Star Sword, and we'll learn that Rune is a Starborn Prince, which is basically like this special star power that only some of the Fae have. He's also the son of the Autumn King. So now we know, if he is the son of the Autumn King, that Bryce is the daughter of the Autumn King, but no one knows this. So like they're like, okay, why do you care? Because like tons of people are in the House of Sky and Breath. And Rune is like, she's my cousin. Hunt asks like, where were you tonight? And like basically says like, F you, if I wanted to kill Danica, like I don't have to use a demon. Like I would have just killed her basically. And Rune is the head of the Fae division of the auxiliary. So he's like the head of the Fae police basically. Hunt says, how close are like you and Bryce basically? He's like, I'm not sleeping with her. Like we're family. And Hunt's like, yeah, you guys like to like marry your cousins basically. So okay, that doesn't mean anything. But Rune leaves, and Hunt asks about the tracker in Bryce's water. So she drank some water while she was there, and it will track her for 3 days. So this is like a couple of days after this. Bryce is at the Bone Quarter. She's been staying in a hotel with her mom, and like she's kind of just been hiding. And the last message she has from Ethan, who is Connor's little brother, says, do not come to the sailing. You're not welcome. And the sailing is basically like their burials where they ship you across the river to the Bone Quarter. And if you're worthy, you'll make it. If you're not worthy, your boat will tip over. So Bryce had went to the Bone Quarter to like say her goodbyes that way. And then we go to part 2. This is the trench. And this is 22 months later. So Bryce is back at the White Raven, which is where she had been the night of the murders. And she is having sex with a lion shifter in the bathroom. So like, okay, Bryce, you know, whatever you want to do. And she's running late for her meeting because she's there to meet a vampire named Maximus Tertian. She rarely comes to the White Raven now, you know, since the murders, and she's actually really tense about it, and that's why she's in the bathroom having sex with this lion shifter. She doesn't even know his name, and then he tells her, I can't pay you, and she just, like, laughs, because she's like, everyone thinks I'm a prostitute. She thinks of Fury and Juniper, who she never, like, sees or really talks to anymore, because Juniper is, like, really too busy, and Fury just will not, like, return her messages and calls. So she goes to meet with Maximus. Of course he hits on her, and she's like, I'm not giving you my blood. Like, no thank you. And there's a group of girls there having their drop party, and she thinks about that's how she wanted to do hers. So, like, after the drop, again, they make that first light, and then most of it goes to the government, but, like, they do get to, like, a little vial to keep, and so most of the girls will turn it into, glow sticks and stuff.
Like
party favors, yeah. Yes. And, basically, like, Bryce wanted to do it, and she wanted to turn her light into glow sticks that said, kiss my sparkly ass. I love Bryce so much. So Maximus gives her a check, and she's, like, thinking, like, she knows she won't get any commission off of this, but she goes to leave, and he kind of, like, grabs her, and he's like, for what I just paid, like, you think there would be some other perks, and, like, is trying to, like, grab her wrist, and she notices somebody walk in, and it's Rune. And she goes over to him, or she, like, turns to go to him, and Maximus gets all, like, defensive, and he's like, you're mine. And she's like, you need to chill. He's my cousin. And so then Maximus freaks out because, like, oh, shoot, like, I don't want to mess with Rune, basically. And most people don't really mess with her when they find out that she's related to Rune. But she's like, just think if like they knew he was my brother and not my cousin, basically. And we learn like she hates her dad. She does not talk about her dad. She does not like the man. So Rune is, again, the crown prince, but he is like so rebellious. He has like long dark hair, except for it's shaved on one side. He's like covered in tattoos and piercings. He's got like a lip piercing, and he basically does all of this to piss his dad off. And so she goes over to Rune, who she has not talked to in years, and asks like, why are you here? And it's sad because they used to be like best friends. He tells her that the owner had called him saying that like you're here with Maximus, basically. And like apparently like Maximus's dad is like creepy, torture creepy. And so he doesn't want her around him. Plus he says Maximus was being handsy with you, and like he's like, shouldn't you be at home? Like, don't you have to work tomorrow? And she's like, yes, mom. He tells her that the Autumn Kings actually sent him because he wants you to lay low because the summit meeting is coming up next month. And this is a meeting they have every 10 years in like different cities, but this one's being held in Lunathian. And it's basically like all the heads of all the, not tribes, but all the whatever houses and all the things, like they come together and meet. So as she's talking to Rune, like he starts to mention, something that like triggers her memories about the murders of like Danica, and she's like holding this glass, and it literally like she shatters it in her hand, and he tells her like calm the fuck down, and her body responds to it, and she's like that Fae instinct, and I was like, what does that make you like think of? Does that make you think of Akatar? Because that was like that whole thing, like when Reese like tells them to do stuff, and then they can't, like they have to respond to him. So there's that. Anyways, so Rune offers to walk her home, but she's like, no one can come to my house. Like the only person allowed in her house is Juniper. And she lies and says like, I have my alcohol sweater on. So we learned that Bryce does not party, drink anything anymore since Danica died, but she still lets other people think that she's like a partier. So she heads home and he follows her anyways. And like she goes in the house and she knows like he's outside and will not leave until she turns her lights on, or he'll like send the doorman up to like check on her. So she moved into this apartment 2 years ago, and it's like super pristine. It was already furnished, and we learned that it was actually paid for by Danica, and it was left to her in Danica's will. And she has Syrinx living with her now. So we go over to Hunt, and he's out murdering. Murder. And he kills the person. He sneaks back into the barracks, so it's like the dorms that they live in. And he's trying not to be seen because he's literally like covered in blood. But of course, like the common room is like full of all like, I guess you would consider them his friends. So Naomi, Vic, and Justinian, who is another like slave angel, is there. And Justinian says like a gun would have been easier. And he's like, yeah, Micah didn't want a gun. So Micah basically, he's like Micah's private assassin. And Micah sends him out to tell him who to kill and like how to kill him. Like, do they need to be tortured? Does it need to be quick? Whatever. And he's actually happier that he's under Micah, even though he's still a slave, because his previous owner was Sandriel. And Sandriel was the twin sister of like the love of his life, who is Shahar. And Shahar was like the leader of the rebellion 200 years ago. Shahar was the leader, and Hunt was like her. Okay. Hunt was her like general, basically, and like he like was in love with her, basically. And so after Shahar like fell, he ended up under Sandriel, and so obviously she like really tortured him. But Micah like bought him so many, like 5 years ago maybe. And so Micah actually has a deal for him, and he told Hunt that if he makes up all of the deaths that he caused in the rebellion, that he will free him. And so he tells Hunt he's responsible for 2,217 deaths. And even though Hunt didn't actually kill that many people, but he's like, well, you were like the general, so you're responsible for all those deaths. So Hunt, like as a Vanir, he knows that he may live to be like 800 years old. So he's hoping like, okay, that maybe I can like make this up and like live a couple of years on my own. And he's currently at 82. Like, hasn't even made a dent in this number, basically. And we do learn that Hunt is actually not his real name. His real name is Orion Athalar, the Hunter. So that's why we call him Hunt. So Bryce is at work the next day, and there's a couple in there shopping, and their buzzer goes off. And it's Hunt and Isaiah. And she's like, I didn't order pizza. They need to, and she's like, they're like, we want to talk to you. And she's like, okay, like, you need to make an appointment. I'm available in 3 weeks. And they're like, let us in. So she does finally like let them in or whatever. And Hunt expects her to be scared because he's the Umbra Mortis. And she's like, I don't give a shit, basically.
I love how sassy she is.
She's so sassy. Like, she's not especially like of a man. Like, she's not letting no man like get her worked up. So they come to tell Bryce that Maximus was killed, and she was like one of the last people that was seen with him. And she says, I'm sure that you know that we left on bad terms because, you know, he was like trying to be handsy with her. But she's like, I didn't kill him. And she's like, okay, so how did he die? And they're like, well, that's classified. And Hunt can't help but like look at her body and her skimpy clothes and her heels. And he's like, yeah, she's just a party girl. And he thinks about the scar that or the like cut she had in her leg that night that he found her. And he's like, yeah, she probably had that scar healed so she can wear her bikinis or whatever. And she asked them like, okay, well you can, or she tells them like, okay, well you can ask Rune like where I was last night because he followed me home. And they tell her that Micah is coming to see her as well. And basically Maximus's injuries were the same as the ones that killed Danica. And she like has a panic attack because Briggs is supposed to be the one who killed Danica. And Briggs has been in prison since that night. So if Briggs is locked up and the murders are happening again, who killed Danica? So she calls Jessica and she's like, hey, Umbra Mortis is here and Micah, the Archangel, the governor, is on his way. So basically, the reason they think it was Briggs is because the demon that killed Danica was summoned from hell, basically. And Briggs was seen buying salts right before, like, in between being released and Danica being murdered. He was seen buying those salts, so they assumed it was him. So she's like, okay, maybe, like, the salts were just left and, like, somebody, like, maybe one of his followers is, like, doing it now. But Jessica says, like, make sure you have everything locked down. And, like, she can hear, like, two males in the background, like, get it, Jessica? And we learned that Jessica basically, like, forced her back to work, like, very quickly after Danica died. So Micah arrives, and he is, like, super powerful, and he, like, oozes, like, sex and death, which is a wonderful combination of things to ooze, I guess. And she immediately is like, ooh, but then she immediately is like, no, because she remembers and sees Hunt's tattoo as a slave, and that disgusts her, because you're a slave owner. Which, thank you, Bryce. And so her scar that Hunt assumed was healed is not healed, and it is killing her. Because she's like dragging these chairs to like get everyone to sit down, and it like hurt her legs. And she's like trying not to rub her leg because she doesn't want anybody to know about her scar. So she pulls Jessica up on like a live feed because Jessica travels a lot, and Jessica basically is like, you know, why are we having this meeting, or like, are you just here to see like Miss Quinlan, basically, like to look at her? And Micah is like, I want Bryce to find the killer. And she freezes because she's like, I'm not a detective. Micah says Briggs will stay in jail, like, regardless, because he had other charges. But basically, like, my Ox unit has exhausted all their resources, and the summit is coming, and he doesn't want, like, his abilities as governor, like, questioned, basically. So Hunt is like, of course this is a PR stunt. Like, of course you don't actually really care. But the summit is, like, basically just going to be all the city heads, like, throwing their weight around for a week. And Micah just gets to throw his power around, basically. So Jessica says, like, okay, is there anything happening at the summit this year? And Micah tells them, well, there is going to be a new witch queen sworn in because the queen had recently died. And also, Sandriel is going to be coming, and she'll be giving a report. And Sandriel is actually going to be coming a month early, so she'll be here, like, any day. And Hunt is like, WTF? Like, no thank you. Micah says Bryce is the only one who's actually seen the demon. And she's like, okay, what about the angel that he was like eating basically that night? And Micah says like he doesn't have any memories, but he did survive. Hunt thinks is like basically if Micah loses his position, like he's like property. So he'll just go to another slave master and they're probably not going to honor the bargain that he like that even gives him a slight chance of being free. And Sandriel is going to be bringing her Triari, which includes Pollux, who they call the Hammer. And he is a bastard. He sucks. So we are like learning a little bit about the demons. So we learned that hell is like another world basically. And there are 7 rings or territories or layers, and they're all ruled by a different prince. There is the Hollow. So you'll learn that like the parts of this book are actually broken up into some of the like layers of hell. So there's the Hollow, the Trench, the Canyon, the Ravine, the Chasm, the Abyss, and at the very bottom, the Pit. And each one has like a prince. So like there's the Prince of the Pit, basically. Micah says that Maximus and Danica were friends, and Bryce is like, no, they were not. Like, I would have known that. And Micah says, I don't think that you knew as much as you thought you knew about Danica. Jessica asks if Bryce is a suspect because she was also not friends with Maximus, but she was like connected to both of them. And Micah says, not yet. And Bryce says, why do you think like I can do this? She's like, why don't you get the Hind, which is another of Sandriel's Triari, and the Hind is Lydia, and she is a deer shifter, but she's like a super assassin spy, basically. Micah doesn't want this information getting out to the city. Again, like he doesn't want people knowing that he can't handle the situation. And also the Hind or Lydia and then Pollux or the Hammer, they are actually a couple as well. So they're like the super evil couple. And then they also have the Harpy and the Hellhound and the Hawk. So those are like Sandriel's Chiari. So those are all people that are going to be coming. Micah believes that Danica knew her killer since like they were able to get in the apartment basically. And Jessup was like, okay, like you can borrow Bryce, but like you need to pay me basically. And Micah says, you're a citizen of the Republic. And she says, and by bylaws, you're hiring me as an outside contractor. And I was like, okay, 1099 worker, like get your compensation. So Micah agrees and says, you are the only tie between the victims and have access to this gallery, which like basically should give her like, the gallery gives her access to like other nefarious people probably that you normally wouldn't run into. Micah says Isaiah will keep like ties on you and that Hunt is going to be your protector. And Jessica says, try not to die, Bryce. I don't really want to have to train a new assistant. And so Bryce basically like kicks them out and shuts the door on Hunt. And Hunt like, there's wards here too. So Hunt like puts his hand in the door and it's literally like zapping him with like all the power of the wards. And he's like fighting it off basically. And he says, I need you to make a list of Danica's last days and like where she was moving and also people she may know. And she says, I'll call you. Don't call me. And shuts the door. So Hunt is like on the gallery roof with Micah and Isaiah. And he is like, I would love to kill Micah. Like he still hates him even though he gives him like a deal basically. Micah says that Sabine is also looking for like who the killer is. And he wants them to find out first. Hunt asks, like, will this count towards my quota, basically, because this might take, like, months away from me, like, doing my other jobs. And Micah says, I'll make you a deal. If you solve this before the summit, I'll lower your debt to 10. From 2,217. Like, yeah, I'll take that deal. Micah says, like, basically, keep your dick in your pants. And he's like, you need to, like, and keep your hands to yourself. And he's like, or you're going to find yourself without both. And we learn that if you make the drop and you're immortal, you'll regrow things. So, like, Hunt's like, I could live without, like, my penis. It'll grow back. It probably won't be pleasant. Like, oh, my God. Kill me now. Like, that's horrible. So, Isaiah, like, bows to Micah, and Hunt's like, Isaiah has assimilated so well into, like, the whole Asterian, like, culture or whatever. And he's like, Isaiah probably will have his like slave mark lifted to him because like everyone likes Isaiah. But Micah leaves and him and Isaiah talk about Sandriel coming. And Isaiah says, like, I'll do you a favor. Like, I'll order you to stay with Bryce at all times so you don't have to be at the comitium when Sandriel gets there. And Hunt thinks how Isaiah should have been like a higher up, but because he and Isaiah were both low-born angels, like no one even thought about them before like they joined Shahar. Even like with how powerful Hunt is. Isaiah says he's going to go see Rune to confirm like Bryce's alibi, but he doesn't want Hunt to come because Rune and Hunt got into a fight a little while ago and Hunt broke Rune's nose. I think this was last year. So Bryce has no idea like who possibly did this, but she's like, it's worth it to find out. And now she's limping from the pain in her scar. So she goes to her desk and she has a file of like resumes that she hides like within another file because she's always looking for jobs. But she knows like if she tells Jessica she wants to leave, like she'll threaten to kill her. And she knows like Jessica will never check the computer though and like find her file. She also pulls up Connor's messages and reads them and like listens to voicemails from Danica, and she kind of does that like once a month just to like torture herself basically. And she starts to text Juniper and Fury, but then she's like, I don't want to jeopardize like any information getting out, so she doesn't text them. So Rune is over at his father's office, which again is the Autumn King. And his father is like one of the city heads. He tells his dad about Maximus and he's like, yeah, I already know. And he's like, were you going to tell me? Like I am like the leader of the Oct, basically. We learned that Rune had made the drop like 50 years ago. Rune's like 80 something basically. And basically like before you do your drop, you typically, at least for Fae, they go through what they call the ordeal. Like some kind of situation, like a sickness or like a heartbreak. Something happens before people typically like do their drop. And Rune is very powerful, but he does have less power than his father does. And he asks him, like, why didn't you tell me? And his father's like, am I beholden to you, Prince? And the Autumn King is like 500 years old, and he's been king like most of that time. And there are other Fae princes, but Rune is the only starborn prince, which means he has this like starlight power. Rune hates everything that he has because like it all comes from his father's money and he hates his father. And so he like also kind of like Bryce, he chooses to live with his friends in like a rundown house instead of like this nice townhouse. And his father says, I told you to tell that girl to stay quiet. And his dad never will like call Bryce by her name. He just calls her like that girl. He hasn't said her name for 12 years. Rune learned about Bryce when he was 60, but his father didn't want anything like said until they went to see the Oracle. And something happened at the Oracle when Bryce came around. I think she was 13, that his father like just deserted her. And Rune like kept visiting her after this point, but then her and Rune had a like fallout like a few years back, and so that's why Rune and Bryce don't talk now either. Rune says Bryce has nothing to do with like the murders and she's being guarded by the 33rd. And Rune asked for permission to warn his mother about the murders. So we'll learn that Rune's mother is not the queen. She was like a concubine and like now she's just like well taken care of because she did her duty and produced an heir. But like she's not with the Autumn King. Like he doesn't have a wife at all. And she basically was just used for like breeding. And like even like Rune's mom, like she never cared about Ember. Like she didn't have any like jealousies about that. She actually liked Bryce. And he loves that he takes after his mom. Like he has his mom's dark hair and he has shadow powers. Thoughts? We do love a shadow daddy.
Yes, we do.
But he tells his dad how basically like you bred my mom and like you should basically take care of her. And his dad says like you've benefited from all of this starborn. And all Rune can think about is how his dad always wanted to be a starborn prince and he wasn't. And basically like the sword that Rune has, he had to like go get like kind of like Excalibur and like pull from the stone. And like Rune's dad tried to do everything he could to get that sword and never could. So like now he like gets pissed basically because Rune has it. His father says that he needs him to use his starlight for something, and his dad has like this prism, and Rune barely has any power. Like he has to like fight super hard to even like bring up this star power, and then he's barely able to hold it, and it just like fizzles out while his dad is like writing down notes, and he like takes his notes in all of like the old Fae language. His father says, it's time for you to consider females for marriage and produce an heir and expand our ties. And he says, didn't the Oracle say like you would be a fair and just king, like yada, yada, yada. And Rune is like, to us, he's like, yeah, actually that's not what the Oracle said. And he tells his dad, I am not getting married. And his dad says, we need allies because of the war. And he realizes that he doesn't want him just to get married. He wants him to marry a non-Fae. And we learn that his dad wants him to marry the new queen of the witches. He's like looking at his dad too and thinks like how much Bryce looks like their dad. And his dad also tells him, I want you to find the horn because it's still missing after these 2 years. And he says the horn belongs to the Fae. The Autumn King says the Fae are fading with each generation, and the first Starborn Prince had way more power and light than Rune has now. And he tells his dad, okay, like, why don't you look for it? And his dad says the horn first belonged to Prince Peleus, who was the first Starborn Prince. And you may find that like calls to like. And I was like, where have we heard that before? So the Autumn King says, find the horn, produce an heir, you owe it to the bloodline. And Rune leaves and thinks like what the Oracle actually said. And what the Oracle said to him was that he would be the end of the royal bloodline. So Bryce is at home and Syrinx is like growling and scratching at the windows, and she's like, what is wrong with you? And she's pretty hurt because Juniper texts her saying that Fury had told her about Briggs, but neither one of them had called her. Fury never even talks to her, and she's like, okay, like what the hell? Like I was going to text you guys to let you know, and then like I was going to text both of you, but then like you guys don't even do the same decency to me. So she goes over to the window and like, what is Syrinx doing? And she sees Hunt across the street on the roof because she can see his gray wings, and she just like smiles at him and then slams her curtain closed. So he like flies over, or no, he calls her and is like, open the curtain. And she's like, how did you get this number? And he's like, it's in your file. And he's like, open the curtains. Like I wanted to watch TV or whatever. And she says, when did you start watching trash TV? And she asks him like, did you check in with Hunt? Like basically like clear my alibi. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, basically, I can't leave you alone. It's orders. And I can't disobey. And she like kind of feels bad because she's like, yeah, he is a slave. Like he really doesn't have free will. But she's like, no, thank you. I'm not going to open the blinds. So he like slams into the window and he says, neither of us gets a choice on this arrangement. So just make your list and let's get started. And then he's like, do not fuck with me. And she's like, you're an alpha hole. I love when they fight. I love it. I love it. I love it. And he asks, like, do you even have weapons in here? And she says, bug me again and find out. And she, like, closes the curtains on him again. So he goes, like, back across the street and waits on the roof. And he calls Isaiah. And he says, this is, like, no, I think it's the same day. And he's like, did you know that chimeras can, like, pick locks and teleport, basically? And he's like, because I don't think that Bryce knows that. And he's like, this is a disaster. And Isaiah's like, it's literally been one day. And he says, yeah. And I woke up this morning and the chimera was next to me, bit me in the butt, and then went back home. And so when Bryce looked out the window, I was like grabbing my butt and she thought I was a freak of nature, basically. And he's like, then I went over to try to explain to her and she just turned her music up. And he's like, I can't get into her apartment because she has all these like wards up. Also, Bryce keeps walking around her apartment in like a black bra and a black thong. Like, Bryce, you are so ridiculous. And Isaiah's like, so what is the emergency exactly? And he's like, I may have to kill her. And he's like, okay, well, where's Bryce now? So this is like later in the day. He's like, she's getting her nails done. She's been getting her nails done for an hour. He's like, her nails are more important than her friend's murder. So after like getting her nails done, Bryce goes to work and Lahaba's like, why don't you let him in? He's so handsome. And like Lahaba just loves men. Like she loves a man. And we learn that Lily or Lahaba also has the same tattoo as Hunt and like all the sprites do because they're all slaves. And Lahaba says like, buy me so I can live in your apartment. And that's when we learn like Lahaba is supposed to guard the books and everything. And in this library, there's like a giant tank and it's empty right now, but normally it holds some kind of like deadly animal. And Bryce is like thinking that she has something dangerous planned for tonight and she knows the Hunt will be pissed. So Rune, we go back over to Rune and he's just like super high, like laying on his bed. And Bryce, like first he like senses, like he smells Bryce. And then he's like, oh, that's a female. And then he sees her and he feels like the sword is like singing like in his presence. And he just sees all these stars. And he's like, okay, it's the drugs. And Bryce has not been to his house since she was 16 years old and she's 25 now. He's lived in this house for 20 years. And his roommates are Tristan Flynn. I love Tristan and Declan. I can't remember what Declan Emmett. So Tristan is like, he's just another like, they're both Fae. Tristan is like part of the Ox. Declan is like a computer hacker. Flynn has like this weird like earth magic too. Like it's a little bit different. And they don't know that Bryce is his sister. They also think that she's his cousin. So we learn that Flynn is actually like from a noble family and he will become like Lord Hawthorne one day. And Rune had gone through his ordeal with Flynn and Declan. Basically, he had went to Avalon, which is like another like island of Fae. It's guarded by like these mists and stuff. And that's when he got the Star Sword. And like basically he kind of almost died during this. And then he made the drop and Flynn was his anchor. So Bryce asked Rune, like if they can talk in private, basically. And she's like, have you heard what the Viper Queen's like been up to? Because apparently Maximus was killed in the meat market, which is the Viper Queen's territory. And Rune says like, stay out of this. And she's like, I can't. Micah's like making me. She says like, I have to find the murderer. And he says, this is the opposite of laying low. And he asks if Jessica like ever said anything about Luna's horn. And she says like, she had me look for it, but I only ever found dead ends. And she leaves and he follows. And as she's leaving the house, he sees Hunt across the street. And it's like, what the hell? Like, and Declan and Flynn come out and they're like, what the hell is going on? And Hunt like looks at him and just smiles at him. And Rune is like, I'm about to murder. I'm about to kill him. And he's like, what are you doing here? And Hunt smiles and says, protection duty, not my call. And Hunt asks Rune, like, did you figure out the demon? And Rune says, blow me, Athalar. I love them. One thing, I didn't even mention this. So Crescent City is very modern. Like, it is not, it's not like, so it's like they got cell phones. Like, obviously, like, it's very, like, it's 2024 in here. Like, I love this. Like, some people think that's weird, but I love it. Like, I love it so much. And Rune tells Hunt, like, don't let her go to the Viper Queen. And Hunt's like, I'm sorry, what? Because he had no idea that's where she was going. So Bryce gives Hunt her list and he's surprised. And she's like, yeah, you thought I was just like a dumb girl, basically. And she says, I also have been searching Maximus and I found out that he has a girlfriend. And that's who did my nails today. And all she did was talk about him. So like Hunt was judging her for getting her nails done. And the whole time, like she's working the case. She says that Danica wasn't friends with Maximus. Like, oh, she says like she still doesn't think that Danica was friends with Maximus, but she found out that the girl who did her nails, the girlfriend, was also the person who does the Viper Queen's nails, and that Danica did have a relationship with the Viper Queen. She says that he should also like be following the Autumn King because like she thinks it's weird that her dad told her to like lay low or whatever. And she doesn't think that he killed Danica, but he's like, he's just sketchy or whatever. So she goes home after they have this conversation and she's like, okay, I'm going to wait 30 minutes and I'm going to the meat market. So she sneaks out and she gets there and she just like waits, and Hunt literally like slams from the sky and is like, what are you? He's like, I'm going to kill you. She says, you're 2 minutes late. And she's like, I'm not here for the Viper Queen. I'm here to find a salt dealer. And we learn that black salt, there's different types of salt. Black salt is the type that summons demons. And there's obsidian salt, which is probably the one that summoned that terrible demon. So, only like one demon can be summoned at a time though. So there's like limits to this, I guess. And Hunt thinks that, like he feels like her like looking for salt makes her look like more of a suspect, since like she knew exactly where to find the salt dealer. And she is like basically arguing with this dealer about the salt. He's like, I don't have that type of salt. She tells the dealer like, okay, well, I'll just call your queen if you won't sell it to me. So he finally like gives in, and before she can call like the Viper Queen, which she wasn't, but he gives her the salt. And she has it like cut into sevens because again, that's like their holy number. And this was all a ploy to get the Viper Queen to come and talk to them, because she knew like she couldn't just go in there and talk to the Viper Queen, but she bought this salt and like knew someone would tell her. And she says, I thought your boss, the Viper Queen says this to Bryce. She says, I thought your boss paid you too well to shop here. And one thing about the Viper Queen is she has guards, and a lot of them are Fae and Vanir, but they are addicted to her venom. Like she literally is a viper. Like she's a humanoid type viper thing, and she has venom that she gives them, and they're like it's like being on crack basically. So Hunt says, you bought the salt just to get her attention, and the Viper Queen says that you'd be stupid to start a war with Maximus's father by killing him. Or no, the Viper Queen says that she didn't kill Maximus because she's like, I'd be stupid to start a war with like the Tertians basically. And she's like, Bryce asks like, okay, so then why did you pull like your people off the street? Because like she had pulled all her people in. And the Viper Queen says, I can taste when things are about to go down. I can taste it now. And Bryce says, so who killed him? And she says, hard saying, it's the meat market. And the Viper Queen gives them a flash drive, and she's like, this is my alibi for Maximus and Danica's death. And it's basically like like when Maximus died, she was, I don't know where, but one of the times she was at like a 3-day orgy. And the Viper Queen says, she says this to Hunt. She says, I heard you're one hell of a ride when you paused the brooding Athalar. And the Viper Queen says, like, basically tells Bryce she needs to look towards where it hurts the most for her answers. So Bryce is trying to work on making a list of like all the places Danica had been, but like it kind of brings back some trauma for her. And Lahaba is down there with her, and she's watching what Bryce calls Fangs and Bangs, which is like a trashy TV show. And Bryce lets Hunt come in the gallery because Lahaba's like, just let him come in. And Lahaba calls Hunt Athy. And like when he comes in, Lahaba is like banging on the door, and she's like, I just wanted to see if you're all right. Which no, Lahaba, you just wanted to like you wanted him to know that you were there. And she's like, can I come out and like see him or whatever? And Bryce tells Hunt like, you can't tell Micah anything about what you see in the library. And Lahaba says, he's so cute. And Bryce is like, in her head, she's like, okay, like he is kind of cute, like whatever. Lahaba asks, how much did Hunt cost? And Bryce is like, Lahaba? But I mean, Lahaba's also a slave, so whatever. Hunt asks Bryce, or like, because Bryce has earrings down. He's like, you paid that much for him? And Lahaba says, yeah, she'll be paying it off until she's 300. So basically she like sold herself to Jessica to buy earrings. And she takes like a little piece from each check, which is why when she met with Maximus, she was like, she wasn't going to get a commission. Bryce says she bought him because basically Jessica was going to sell him to some like evil buyer who wanted to like break him. Hunt asks, or says like, I thought you were loaded because of the apartment you live in. And she's like, the apartment was Danica's. And she thinks how her mom tried to get her to go to therapy after Danica died, but she would never show up. And so her solution was to buy a diffuser and like just do deep breathing. And she knew that therapy would have made her feel better. And that's why she didn't do it, because Bryce has like a suffering complex. She just feels like she doesn't deserve to be happy. Lahaba says like, I'm going to take a nap. And she tells Hunt like, don't let the book sweet talk you. And like one of them falls off the shelf, and she turns to it and she's like, bad. And Bryce is like, oh no, Bryce asks Hunt to help her with the list. And Bryce asks how old Hunt is. And we learn that he is 233. And they talk about the day that Bryce got her tattoo and then like kind of go back through her memories. And Rune texts Bryce to meet him at Luna's temple. So we learn, like, we mentioned Luna in the beginning. Luna is the patron goddess of the Fae and the wolves. And they do like stag sacrifices to her, which just put a pin in that for like 5 months from now. And there's also like a tour going on like while they go there. So the tour guide says that this city was picked because the river runs through it and makes the shape of a crescent. So that's why they call Lunathian Crescent City. And Rune is like hiding because he has shadow powers. So he's like hiding in the shadows. And he tells them that the Autumn King wants the horn. The horn belonged to Peleus and was a weapon from their old home to fight the demons. Because the Fae in Midgard did not originate in Midgard. They came from somewhere else. Rune shows pictures from the archives that he found, and it's the same demon. And the demon is known as a star eater from the pit, known the Crystallos. And Peleus used the horn to banish the Prince of the Pit and his other brothers back to hell through what's called the Northern Rift. So there's like a thing at the north side of the city they call the Northern Rift, and that is like a portal to hell. And supposedly a portal to other worlds. So the horn was cracked when this happened, and so like it doesn't have any power now. Like it's literally just like an artifact. And Rune says like when he was looking in the archives last night, like he could just sense the book, like if it was his star powers, and it jumped at him. And since he's starborn, he feels like he can track the horn like the Crystallos does. And if they find the horn, they should be able to like summon the demon will probably appear. The temple that they are in currently also has priestesses that honor Luna. And Hunt calls Justinian to look up the Crystallos. And Justinian tells Hunt, like, you know, it's time to, like, move on from Shahar, basically, because he's like, oh, like, how's it going with Bryce or whatever? And Hunt just hangs up on him. So Bryce asks Rune, because Hunt goes like outside to make that call. Bryce asks Rune, like, do you think that our dad killed Danica? And he's like, no. He thinks that his dad's just taking advantage of the situation. And she says, why would I listen to you? Like, I'm just a half-breed slut, right? And he's like, Bryce, you know I didn't mean that. And she says, you try to act so different, but you're just the same as all of the other Fae. So Jessica calls requesting that Bryce send her a file because Jessica's like out of the city or whatever. And Bryce asks, like, why can't you just get it yourself? And she says, like, when I ask you to do something, you should do it. And she's like, do you want to be a dung beetle? And Bryce says, no, I think I'd rather be a dragonfly.
I love that part.
So she goes to like Jessica's office, and in the office there is a dismantled rifle on the wall that they call the Godslayer, and there's a bullet that goes along with it, and the bullet says Memento Mori, which made me think of Midnight Rambler. Because wasn't that what he said all the time?
See, I was wondering. I was like, why does this sound
so familiar? Yeah, and that's what, when I was reading Midnight Rambler, I was like, what? I've heard that somewhere. Like, where did I hear that from? It's from here, so Memento Mori.
I was wondering what. I was like, I know that I've heard that before.
Yeah, so it's a real phrase, because I'm like, it's in several books now, so I'm like, okay. So she like sees it on the wall or whatever, and she sends Jessica the file, and Hunt calls saying there was another murder and no witnesses, and he wants her to come, but like she doesn't want to see that, but he takes her anyways, and she immediately has like PTSD. She's having flashbacks, and Rune is there and is like, she does not need to see this, and like takes her away, and Hunt slips and is like, I think it was like the Crystallos that attacked Micah, and Bryce is like, I'm sorry, come again. Because she didn't realize, because obviously when the angel was being attacked, he was probably like covered in blood and all kinds of stuff. She didn't realize that she saved Micah that night. It was the governor. And it's a secret because it wouldn't look good for like a half fae, half human female to save the freaking governor, who is an archangel and supposed to be like the strongest person in the city. So she asked Hunt, like, why didn't anyone tell me? And he says, like, basically right after Danica died, her phone got hacked and like all her text messages get released, which we learned about. And it just like seemed like a bad idea to tell you. And she says, I needed to know that. Like, I needed to know what I did that night mattered. And like, she had looked for him and had no idea. Hunt says, I'm sorry for all of it. He's like, I'm sorry that you're on my suspect list. And she's like, I'm sorry. What? She's like, you're what? She said, after all that I've done, you think I'm a suspect? And she's basically like, get the hell out of my face. Like, get out of my sight. And she just like takes off running. And she ends up at the White Raven. And she like pulls up her messages with Danica and like looking through them. And she looks at a picture of her and Danica, which is after that motorcycle accident they had. And we learned that they were basically like held at gunpoint by these like males basically. And Danica had saved her that day. And that was the time that Bryce like that Danica first told Bryce that she loved her back. And she had told Danica basically like to close her eyes in the memory, and it cuts off there and Bryce goes into the club and Hunt is like above her in the, like, it's raining. So Hunt's like, Micah's gonna kill me, like I messed up. And the Viper Queen's alibi does check out, and the girl that had been killed was a temple acolyte. So she goes into the club or whatever, and the bouncer won't let him in because Bryce is like on the list. Like the club owner like knows her. She never has to wait in line. And the club owner, the bouncer's like, the line's over there. And he's like, I'm with Quinlan. And he's like, no, you're not. And he's like, I'm with the Ox. And he's like, get out of my face. But the owner comes of the club and is like, let him in. So he goes in and Bryce is in there with Juniper. And Juniper asks like, are you eating? And Bryce says, I'm having a liquid dinner. And so like, Juniper orders food. She's a deer shifter, so like she doesn't eat meat. She's a vegetarian. But Hunt like orders like, he's all aggressive and possessive and orders Bryce food anyways. And then he snaps at her like, you're just gonna come and drink, blah 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 blah. And he like grabs her drink and smells it, and it's water. And she says, I don't drink. And he's like, why? And she says, you figure it out. You're the Umbra Mortis. And then Rune shows up, and he tells Hunt like, because Bryce like walks off because she's like, you're stupid. And he tells Hunt like how Bryce has like stopped dancing since Danica, and like basically all the stuff that's changed with her. And Hunt is surprised because he's like, I thought she was a party girl, and she's not at all. And then Bryce is like making her way back across the club, and a bomb goes off. And she throws herself on top of Juniper, who snaps at her because she's like, Bryce, I made the drop 2 years ago. You have not made the drop. Like, what is wrong with you? And Hunt, like, they like find the bomb or whatever, and he knows that this bomb was planted because it was inside the club, and he thinks it might be one of Briggs's bombs because he was a bomb maker, and like maybe his people are putting bombs out. Bryce is like in shock and like is saying like, Juniper can't get injured. She's supposed to be the first fawn to make like principal in the ballet. Like she has a future, blah, 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 blah. And she's just like talking nonsense. And Hunt like kneels down to like check her scar. And she says, when males are kneeling between my thighs, they aren't usually grimacing. And he's like, what? Like, what's going on here? So Rune says the bomb was smuggled in through a crate of wine and that they left a calling card, and it's Briggs supporters. So they were right. And there's a logo and an image left, and it's of the horn. And Bryce is like, I think someone's trying to warn us to stop looking for the horn. And Hunt says maybe this was Briggs all along. And like, he's like, maybe we should go talk to him in prison. Rune says that their dad, Rune says that the Autumn King knows that Bryce is involved and wants to know like, what do you plan on doing if you find the horn? And she's like, I'm going to take it back to the temple. Like, I don't want it. And the Autumn King wants her to have protection now. And Rune's like, I can do it. And she's like, no. She says, Hunt will just stay with me. Like, order fulfilled, because she'd rather have Hunt around than Rune. Rune says he won't be happy about that and wonder if like Hunt is starting to put together like their true relationship. But Bryce asks Rune, like, why were you at the club anyways? And he says he had been tracking her, but he says that instead of telling her the truth, which is that he was tracking her, he says he wants to use Jessica's library to try to look for the horn. So Bryce says, I'll make you a bargain. You can use the archives if I can get access to Declan. And Rune says like, well, that's fine, but like if you tell Declan anything, like he's gonna tell Flynn. So like they're a package deal basically. And she's like, that's fine. She says, tell your daddy we said hi and that he can go fuck himself. And the Autumn King calls and says like he doesn't want the angels getting the horn. So her and Hunt are headed home, and Hunt asks like, why don't you make the drop? And she just says, I was waiting. We were supposed to do it together. And then like he knows she means Danica. And he understands and he relates basically. Oh, my light died. It's okay. He relates to Bryce in like this like punishing behavior basically. But he's like, okay, so like, but why are you still waiting? And they get to the apartment, and for the first time, like he's able to go inside and he sees like how nice it is. And she tells him like basically like her and Danica were going to do the drop together, and that Connor and Thorn, who was another wolf, were going to anchor them. And Hunt tells her like he didn't have any family left to like anchor him. He just like basically went to like the center and did the drop with like a random person. And Hunt just asked like, were you and Danica lovers? Because like they are like so like, and they were like in love, but it's just platonic. Like they just were strongly like platonic friends. And she says no. And she's like, we weren't like that, but she says it was complicated with Connor. And she says when they all died, a light went out in me. And we learned that Ethan, like, so Ethan again was Connor's little brother, and they used to be best friends. Like, she was probably closer to Ethan than she was to Connor. And after like the death, like something went down, and now Ethan does not talk to her. And now he is the second to Amelie, who like replaced Danica. She's like the alpha of like the lead pack now, and he's her second. So Bryce's mom calls, and she like is basically like, no, like me and Juniper weren't at the club. Like she's like, I dropped my phone because Bryce has a house phone, which is so funny. Bryce lost her phone in like the explosion. So she's like, I dropped my phone in the toilet. I'm going to get another one tomorrow. And she's like, no, Mom, you can't come over. I have company. And she's like, Hunt can hear her laughing. And she's like, it's not that kind of company. And, she's like, I'll call you tomorrow, whatever. And so she tells Hunt, like, you can take the guest room. I'm going to take a shower. And he asks, like, why did you lie? And she says, because my mom would only try to come here and visit, and I don't want her around if things were getting bad. Bryce says, I need to find out who did this. And he says, I know. And she says, no, you don't. It's literally going to eat me alive. He tells her that they will find out who it is because he doesn't have a choice either. And then he tells her about his deal with Micah. He assumes that she'll, be like disgusted by his like reason to do that, and she's like no, and says like, no wonder you've been a pain in the ass. And he tells her that she can't say anything about Micah or like he'll take the deal back. And he asks, aren't you gonna tell me I'm a self-serving asshole? And she says, why? You just said it for me. And like he looks her over, like trying not to think about this hot pink underwear that she has on that he's seen like multiple times tonight. And she says it's easier for her when people assume the worst of me because it allows me to get the chance to really see who they are. And he says, so you think I really am an asshole? And she says, I've dealt with a lot of them and you're not one of them. And this time she she offers to get them food. So in the guest room, he sees a picture of her and like her parents, and he recognizes her stepdad, whose name is Randall, and he's like this like super like known sharpshooter. And he realizes like no wonder like Bryce is so fearless. And then he sees a picture of like what is the back of Bryce and Danica, and like Bryce wears Danica's jacket now, which is a leather jacket that says "Through love, all is possible" on the back of it. But when he first saw her wearing it, he was like, oh, like stupid cliche, like party girl. But he realizes that this is Danica's jacket. And in the picture is Danica's sword as well. So the next morning he wakes up and he smells a male in his room, but all he finds is Syrinx. And this is a common question thought. Is Syrinx somebody that she turned into a chimera? Because he's like, I smell a male, but then it's like Syrinx. So obviously, like, I don't know that chimeras are supposed to smell like a male.
Right.
So I don't know. No, we don't know the answer to that. So Hunt thinks like, okay, Bryce must have like left, but he goes and sees her and she's like still sleeping. And then Juniper walks in, but she's like, and he's like, hi. And he tells Juniper like he's just here for protection. And she's like, is being shirtless like part of that? Because he's like, he just woke up. He didn't have a shirt on. Hunt asks, what's an alpha hole? And Bryce is like up at this time and she says, alpha holes, your favorite hobbies are brooding and snoring. And then once you have sex with a female, you become overbearing and possessive, and God help you when you guys start having babies. He says, well, first of all, I don't want to have sex with you. Lies. Like, whatever. And then he's like, you're the one that walks around in their bra and underwear. And she's like, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but she says, you need to stop cursing so much. And he says, you have the dirtiest mouth I've ever seen, sweetheart. You may be the alpha hole. And he says, basically like, anywhere I go from now on, like, you go. Because he's like, I have to go to the comedium and get clothes. And he's like, where are you going to be? And she's like, he's like, with me. So as they like head out, Hunt realizes that her makeup, her clothes, her nails, that is her armor. Like he realizes like she's just been putting on this front and that like that's Bryce's armor. So he asks her about like her relationship with Rune, and she says that basically like they had a fight because of how devoted Rune was to his dad, and they started talking about each other, and he called her a slut, and like They haven't spoken in years, basically. And she knows that Rune was just being overprotective. And she says, like, I hate my father more than anyone except maybe Sabine. And she asks Hunt, like, who's on your shit list? And he says, Sandriel. They're walking past the gate, and she asks him, like, have you ever, like, done it? Like, put your magic on the stone? And he says no. And she says that Rune took her here the very first time. And he's like, what'd you wish for? And she says, bigger boobs. And he's like, looks like that paid off. So, they're not going to the comitium. They're going to work, basically. So Rune meets them at the gallery, and Bryce thinks that they should look in, like, the ancient art, because before there were really books and words, there was art. So she's like, maybe we should look in the art for this demon. And Lahaba is, like, flirting with Rune, and it's like, he's so dreamy. Like, Lahaba loves a man, you guys. I'm like, okay, so what's up with you and Rune? And he says, we got in a fight last year, basically. And Rune is, like, looking at the books, and she's like, Lahaba's like, be careful, like, they might bite. And everybody's like, what? Like, the books bite? So Rune, like, waits for a book to, like, speak to him, and he pulls one out, and it literally is The Great Romances of the Fae. And everyone's, like, joking about, like great choice there, Rune. But Declan sends over some intel to Bryce, and it's basically coordinates on Danica's movements, like, her last days. And it shows that Danica was stationed at Luna's temple 2 days before and the night that the horn was stolen. And they're like, okay, maybe, like, Danica knows who took it. And she's like, no, I don't think Danica would, like, see it be stolen and not say anything. So Rune, like, tells them about his book, and it basically says, like, it talks about Peleus. Peleus, again, was, like, the first starborn prince or whatever, and he married Helena, who was the daughter of Thea, who was a starborn princess. And he was also Thea's general, and Thea had another daughter as well. And it says that the starborn power can be channeled through the horn and other items. And we learned that the Prince of the Pit had stolen star power to make the Crystallos demon. The horn can only be repaired by light that is not light and magic that is not magic. And Rune is, like, basically thinking, like, how disgusted, like, their father is at, like, how weak the Fae's powers are nowadays. And Hunt says, like, what if we ask the Oracle? But Bryce is like, I think we should go to the Mystics. And Hunt's like, no. And Bryce is like, well, I'm not going to the Oracle again. And because of, like, what happened when she went. And Rune, like, doesn't want to go either. And we learned the Oracle is actually a golden sphinx. And Hunt's like, fine, I'll go by myself or whatever. And Hunt goes to take a call. And Bryce asks, like, okay, Rune, like, what's your deal with the Oracle, basically? And he's like, nothing, and he leaves. And Hunt tells Bryce, like, we need to go to the comitium. So they get there, and Bryce has a new phone now. And she takes Hunt's phone, and it only has 34 photos from the last 4 years, and it's literally, like, all dead bodies from, like, crime scenes. And she's like, what the hell? Like, why don't you take pictures? And he's like, what's the point? And she's like, the point is, like, life, like, you're living it. So she asks about their dorms there, and, like, is it mixed dorms? And he's like, yeah, it's mixed. And she's like, okay, like, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? And he's like, no. He says, I had someone once. And this is when he says, like, he made the drop at 28 because his mom had just died. And 5 years later, he was a slave. She asks if he regrets the rebellion. He says, no one's ever asked me that before. And he doesn't know. And she asks, like, why don't you have any, like, pictures or anything in your room? And he says, it's bad luck. I can be moved at any time. And she asks if Micah died the night that she had saved him, basically, like, what would have happened. And Hunt says he would have become someone else's and no one else would honor his bargain. So she asks why Isaiah is the commander and not him, since he has, like, the super lightning power. And he says, because I piss people off. So they put in, like, the request to see Briggs, and they learn that it was approved and that they'll be able to see him in a few days, and that Hunt is going to go to the Oracle tomorrow. So he grabs clothes from his room and they head out. And as they are at the lobby, they run into Micah and Sandriel. So Sandriel, like, addresses them, and Bryce, like, Hunt is, like, frozen, and everyone is bowing, and, like, that's what they're supposed to do, but Hunt is, like, pissed and scared and, like, frozen. So Bryce, like, acts real quick, and she, like, pulls out her phone and starts taking selfies with, like, them in the background. And she's like, thanks for bringing me to see them, Hunt, to, like, try to play it off. And she grabs Hunt and, like, tries to get in the elevator, but Micah comes up to, like, them and tells Hunt, like, explain yourself. And Hunt says, like, I'm just here to get clothes. And Micah is, like, sexually, like, looking at Bryce, and she is not interested at all. And he's like, I want to take you out to dinner. And she's like, no, thank you, not interested. So they go up to the roof, and Hunt's like, I'm going to fly you, which Bryce is terrified. And he's like, I've never dropped anyone. And Hunt asks, like, why don't you want to go on a date with Micah? And she's like, That would be like banging a statue. And he says, well, none of his other females have ever complained. And she's like, why do you all feel like I have to have some big, strong, like alpha male to like make me okay? So that night they're just like watching Samba on TV, and she's like, this is extremely strange. Like, how normal is this? And Micah calls and says like, I have a job for you, and tells him what happened is to never happen again. Am I interrupting your fun with Miss Quinlan? So like, he's pissed about what happened with Sandriel. He's pissed that Bryce turned him down, and he's going to make Hunt do a job. And Hunt says like, I understand. And like, you know, he knows he showed him up in front of Sandriel. So Hunt goes to see the Oracle, and he asks like, why does someone want the horn? And she says to open the Northern Rift, a doorway between worlds. And basically tells him like the horn can be healed and it's veiled so she can't see where it is or who has it. And she goes, do you want to know what I see in your future, Orion Athalar? And like, no one calls him that. And he says, no, I don't. And she asks like, did Bryce tell you what happened 12 years ago? Basically like, I can show you. And he's like, no, that's like not my business or whatever. And she says, stay away from Bryce Quinlan. So Bryce and Rune are like waiting for Hunt outside, and he tells them what the Oracle said. And so they had to like go do research, and Hunt just keeps like staring at Bryce, and she's like, what are you looking at? And he says, can you tell me why the Oracle told me to stay away from you and like offered to show me your vision as like some kind of payback? And she says, when females turn 13 or they start their cycle, they have to go to the Oracle. Basically, they used to use it as like marriage tactics, like, oh, like my daughter's gonna be worth this, like whatever, blah blah blah. So like she started her cycle like right before she turned 13, and when she had it, like her mom panicked and was like, maybe I did the wrong thing by like taking Bryce away from her family. And so she like had this like guilt and wanted her to get to know like the Fae and her dad like for herself. And Bryce was also like interested in learning it or whatever. So she went to her dad, which we know is the Autumn King. She's not telling Hunt this, but she goes to her dad, and so he takes her to see the Oracle. And like what the Oracle does is like look into like smoke or whatever for this vision. So she says the Oracle looked into her smoke and literally started screaming and clawing her eyes out. And like they said that she went blind for a week. And after that, her father like left her at the Oracle, snuck out like the back door, and literally she had to like walk home. And when she got home, he had already like set out all her bags like on the curb or whatever. So they're searching through the art still, and then like as she's telling the story, and they find a vase with the demon with a sword in its head like on the vase. And the vase is from, Bryce says this vase is from Parthos, and Hunt's like, that's not real. And what Parthos is supposed to be this ancient mythical like pre-Fae existent library. And they are also getting ready to go see Briggs, and Lahaba tells Bryce like she needs to be nice to Hunt. And she tells Bryce, you need more friends. You're getting sad like you were 2 years ago. And she says, Danica was never nice to me. And like that kind of sets Bryce off, and she kind of snaps. So Briggs is being held at the Comitium, and I was like, it's the 12th of April. I was like, this is like the exact same time that I'm reading this. So Bryce basically asked Briggs like about the bomb, and he says like, I don't even know what the year is. Like I don't have outside contact. And Briggs says, I failed my people and people like you, Bryce, the undesirables. He says, like, I like Danica, even when she busted me. And he tells them that Danica had actually warned him twice, like, hey, like, you're on thin ice. And the third time, like, she finally had to arrest him. But, like, even then, she kind of went easy on him. And Bryce is like, why would you say that? Like, you, like, are basically trying to make her out to be a sympathizer. And, Bryce is like, that's a really strong accusation. And he says, like, why does it even matter? Like, she's dead now. He's like, that's why, he was like, I didn't want to like kill Danica. Like if she was a sympathizer and she was like as strong as she was, like she would have been a great ally. Briggs asks like, oh, did a lot of like Vanir die in the bombing? And Bryce is like, no, not a single one. And he's like, too bad. But as they're leaving, Briggs recognizes Hunt and tries to ask him like what part of the rebellion he had been in, but Hunt doesn't answer him. Like the way Briggs acts makes Hunt like reevaluate himself, and like he's like, was I like so blindly following Sandriel like the same way that Briggs is like brainwashing people basically? And we learn that Hunt had actually been held for 7 years in the Asteri dungeons after the rebellion. And he says all he had at that time was anger, and the only difference between him and Briggs is that he doesn't want to kill innocent people, and Briggs will. And Bryce tells him, like, you're good, like, don't worry about it. And as they are, like, talking, like, they're sitting, like, I think they're at home, their, like, legs rub up against each other a little bit. And she shows him like Danica's final movements, and he says like, why didn't we think about checking the temple cameras? Because even though they were checked 2 years ago, he's like, maybe they missed something. So they go to meet Rune and Declan and Flynn, and they're at a shooting range. And Flynn always flirts. Like, he is flirt TT. And he flirts, and Hunt is like a little jealous. And Declan is going to review the footage from the temple. And the guys tease Bryce saying like she can't handle a gun. And she literally hands them their ass. She like pulls that gun out, whips it up, and I was like, yeah, this is official. Like, Bryce is a bad bitch. So she like gets the gun out. She shoots 3 times, and they're like, oh, you only hit it once. And they're like, and then one of them is like, no, she hit the same spot 3 times. So Hunt is like, hottie alert. He looks at her, like does not remove eye contact, picks up his gun and shoots through the same hole. And I was like, if this is not like the sexiest thing, I don't know what is. Like this is rated R. What is going on? What is going on here? But he basically like did that because he like wants Bryce to know like, I see you and I'm not intimidated by you. Like, and he thinks like, I wonder like how many other like males have been like intimidated by Bryce. And they get a call that there was another murder. So Bryce feels guilty because she's like, damn, like I was kind of having a good time and like somebody died on my watch basically. But like Hunt reassures her like, this is not your fault. And this murder she does want to see. And she can't believe that she'd let Hunt like see her like that at the range, but she liked it. And at the scene, there's a med witch who Rune goes and talks to. And we learned that the murder was a temple guard. And so basically the last murder and this one were both people that had been at the temple the night that the horn was stolen. So whoever is summoning this demon is avoiding cameras because they literally cannot catch this thing on camera, which makes them think like, okay, well then that person has to know where every single camera is. So they have to have high clearance. So Bryce maps out all these murders and notices that they're all on top of ley lines, which is like power lines of first light, which could be used to enhance like a summoning. And Hunt asks like, have you ever been with Flynn? Because he just flirts with you nonstop. I'm like, yeah. And she says no. She says like, so basically when she was like a teenager, she was like in love and she used to write like Mrs. Bryce Flynn or whatever, like on all of her notebooks or whatever. But she never hooked up with him because like she didn't want to make it weird with her and Rune. So actually Danica hooked up with Flynn. But she tells him she did hook up with a vampire once, and it was a very strange experience. Yeah. So there's that. And as they're getting ready to leave, Sabine shows up and again calls Bryce like a stupid slut because that's her. Like, pick a new word, Sabine. So she gets home and Declan calls her and says, like, you know, do you want to get Hunt on the line? So she goes to get Hunt and like he opens his bedroom door and he's shirtless and she's like, hubba, 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 hubba. Okay, good God. But she knows like Hunt is basically like a lost cause because he basically told her like Shahar was like it for him. Like there will never be anything other than Shahar. And I'm like, that is the most, Shahar has been dead for 200 years. Like you have got to let it go. So Declan tells them there's no video footage, but there is audio. And he says in the audio, he can hear the gate. And the gate is halfway across the city from Luna's temple. And he tells them this video was swapped. And it was swapped by Sabine. So they're like, oh, okay. And we go to part 3. So I'm going to stop here. And look at that. It's only an hour and 45 minutes. So I'm going to stop here because we're going to go do the second 2 parts, part 3 and 4 in next week's episode. So there is no like recap or anything. I guess, what did you think like up to this point?
Okay, so I was really curious about the whole talking about like whoever knew about, you know, where the cameras were had to have high clearance and blah blah blah. And I had my suspicions briefly about a person or two.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering.
Really enjoyed it though.
All right. Well, we're going to stop here. So if you're not already, make sure you're following us on TikTok, on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Buttrospective. And then also check out our website, buttrospective.com, to stay up to date on what we're going to be reading. And that is all. Bye.
I was really curious about the whole talking about like whoever had knew about where the cameras were had to have high clearance and blah blah blah, and I had my suspicions briefly about a person or two.
Okay.
But yeah, okay, yeah.
I just wondered.
Really enjoyed it though.
All right. Well, we're gonna stop here. So if you're not already, make sure you're following us on on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Butcherspective, and then also check out our website butcherspective.com to stay up to date on what we're gonna be reading. And that is all. Bye.
Bye. I was really curious about the whole talking about like whoever had knew about where the cameras were had to have high clearance and blah blah blah, and I had my suspicions briefly about a person or two.
Okay.
But yeah, okay, yeah.
I just wondered.
Really enjoyed it though.
All right. Well, we're gonna stop here. So if you're not already, make sure you're following us on on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Butcherspective, and then also check out our website butcherspective.com to stay up to date on what we're gonna be reading. And that is all. Bye.
Bye. I was really curious about the whole talking about like whoever had knew about where the cameras were had to have high clearance and blah blah blah, and I had my suspicions briefly about a person or two.
Okay.
But yeah, okay, yeah.
I just wondered.
Really enjoyed it though.
All right. Well, we're gonna stop here. So if you're not already, make sure you're following us on on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Butcherspective, and then also check out our website butcherspective.com to stay up to date on what we're gonna be reading. And that is all. Bye.
Bye. I was really curious about the whole talking about like whoever had knew about where the cameras were had to have high clearance and blah blah blah, and I had my suspicions briefly about a person or two.
Okay.
But yeah, okay, yeah.
I just wondered.
Really enjoyed it though.